Welcome back to Viewpoint. Now, if you've just arrived today from Swaziland or Estonia or Mars, you might not know that the opposition, the coalition, the Liberal and National parties are opposed to two taxes. They're opposed to the carbon tax and the mining tax. And a large part of their economic strategy and political strategy is to promise to repeal both those taxes. But what doesn't get as much attention, of course, is that they want to impose a new tax too in order to fund a very generous parental leave scheme. They're suggesting that they would levy big business an extra 1.5% on their company tax to pay for this big, generous parental leave scheme. So they're giving you an extra tax to make up for the two they're getting rid of. To try and make sense of all this, I'm joined from Canberra by the Shadow Assistant Treasurer, Senator Matthias Cormann. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
Now, how can you run this message that you're the low tax party, you're against new taxes, you're going to repeal these two taxes, but you're going to give us a new one?
Well, you just got to, taking a step back, like obviously our perspective on the performance of the government over the last 4 or 5 years is that they've taken Australia in the wrong direction when it comes in particular to our international competitiveness and our capacity to grow our economy more strongly moving forward. So what we've said and what we're very clearly on the record about is that we will get rid of the carbon tax because it reduces our international competitiveness. It pushes up the cost of living, pushes up the cost of doing business without doing anything to help reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. And we will get rid of the mining tax, which is a complex investment-destroying, job-destroying tax. And we're also committed to lower income taxes without a carbon tax and to a modest company tax cut without a mining tax.
I'm still waiting for you to mention the new tax, though, the new levy on business to fund the parental leave scheme.
Well, as you know, and that was a policy that we took to the last election, we remain committed to a strong and fair dinkum paid parental leave scheme because, in our judgment, a fair dinkum paid parental leave scheme is a very important workforce participation measure, part of our productivity agenda. We are concerned about the low levels of productivity growth under the current government. It is down to about 0.7% per year over the last 5 years, compared to 2.25% per year under the previous Howard government. So the paid parental leave scheme is part of our productivity agenda. In the lead up to the last election, we were very transparent about how we intended to fund that particular commitment through a temporary levy on the biggest companies, a 1.5% temporary levy on the biggest companies. In the lead up to the next election, we will equally be as transparent as to how we intend to fund that commitment.
Well, in
the context.
You say it's temporary, but it comes in. It's an extra 1.5% tax for big business. And yes, you say you'll get rid of it one day. Well, there's no deadline on it. There's no sunset clause, so we don't know. Well, aren't you also, you talk about productivity, aren't you very, very concerned, and you certainly say you are very often, about the costs on business in this country, how Australia's becoming a costly place to do business? How can you run that argument and impose a higher tax on business?
Well, I mean, Chris, there's a whole range of things that you've sort of mentioned in there. Obviously, over the last, 5 years, we've had a government that was unable to live within its means, despite the best terms of trade in 140 years over its first 4 budgets, despite more than 26 new or increased taxes. They haven't been able to balance the books to the point where they've spent $172 billion more than they've raised in revenue. So our preference, of course, would be to be able to fund a fair dinkum paid parental leave scheme from within existing resources. However, given the mess that the Labor Party has made of our budget position, that is currently not an option. Now, obviously, as you sort of look at what is required in order to make sure that we can maximise our opportunities across the economy and to make sure that we are as resilient as possible against any challenges that we're facing in a global economic context. Obviously, one of the judgments we've made is that we need to increase our productivity growth moving forward. Now, part of the productivity agenda is increasing workforce participation. Another part of it, of course, is to be serious and fair dinkum about cutting red tape. Now, there's a whole range of things that we want to do that ultimately are designed to get our economy to grow more strongly, so that ultimately not only do we increase our prosperity as a nation, but we also end up raising more revenue for government without the need for all these new increased taxes. So the objective would be, of course, to balance the books at the earliest opportunity and to, over time, be in a position where there is no longer the need for that temporary levy.
But look, the public who are hearing the political debate at the moment are hearing the government say that they need to tighten the rein and cut spending in order to deliver a surplus. You are even stronger on that, and we've heard some encouraging things, I think, from the opposition regarding a focus on small government and ending the culture of entitlement. But those are just words if you're not prepared to actually deliver policies to the public that back that up, because this paid parental leave scheme actually runs counter to all of those words and is a $3 billion extra cost on business and an expansion of government.
Well, Chris, obviously we've still got some work to do to convince you of the merits of the paid parental leave scheme. I mean, we think it is a very important economic initiative, a very important part of our productivity agenda, which is designed to lift our economic performance as a nation, lift our economic growth, and of course there will be all sorts of benefits that flow from that, both for people across Australia and also for the government. I mean, fundamentally, we are living at a pretty exciting time. We're living at a time, and at a place where most of the economic growth is going to be generated globally in the Asia-Pacific over the next few decades. But we need to be in a position to be able to take full advantage of those opportunities that present themselves to us. So we do need to focus on our productivity moving forward. We do need to focus on our international competitiveness moving forward. And workforce participation, whatever way you look at it, is going to be an important part of that. And there are things that we need to do to lift workforce participation, in particular by women.
All right, well, let's look at that broader budgetary challenge. Your Shadow Treasurer, Joe Hockey, in the past has talked about a $70 billion challenge in terms of cutting government spending over the forward estimates. We now say the government heading towards, they say, a surplus. What's the quantum of cuts that you think you need to identify before the next election?
Well, I mean, that figure has actually been, seriously misquoted and misused.
Obviously, sure. So what's the latest figure? Things have changed since that was thrown about anyway.
Well, firstly, the figure, the $70 billion figure, was not a figure that was related to a forward estimates period. It was a figure that related to a forward estimates period and 2 further years, and just accumulating the revenue that the government said they would collect from the carbon tax and the mining tax. And of course, firstly, the government so far does not appear to have raised any revenue from the mining tax, and secondly, there's a whole series of promises the government has attached to both the mining tax and the carbon tax that we've said we would not be proceeding with in government. So these are immediate savings for us, and so to suggest that the
point I want to come to, Matthias Cormann, is this really, and that is that you're preaching a strong message about restricting government spending and getting a strong surplus, but you're also saying you'll axe these taxes, and you're also saying you'll deliver some tax cuts. You're giving us all of these things that together add up to sort of magic pudding economics until you start to identify the cuts. And I'm wondering if in these circumstances the public aren't just ready to be taken into your confidence and some of those cuts shared with them in the lead up to the election, because they're being told we need to do this.
Well, 2 points on this, and this is probably not something that's widely understood. The mining tax package and the carbon tax package both leave the budget worse off. The mining tax package, even if the mining tax raised as much revenue as the government thought it would raise, given all of the spending the government attached to it when they tried to sell the package initially, the budget is worse off as a result of the mining tax minus the related spending. The carbon tax is expected to raise $25 billion over the forward estimates. Spending related to it is about $30 billion. So again, the budget ends up $5 billion worse off. Now, in terms of what we're going to do, well, it's very difficult to make firm and final judgments until we know what the position of the budget is going to be closer to the election. Let me explain that. The most recent final budget outcome that we've got in front of us is for the 2011-12 financial year, which shows a deficit of $43.7 billion. Now, in the lead up to the last election, Wayne Swan, in a strategically timed economic update, told told us that the deficit would be $10 billion. So there was a $33.7 billion deterioration in the budget bottom line. Now there is another 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 months to go before the next election. Who knows how much further the 2012-13 budget position will deteriorate. So for us to make final and responsible judgments, final judgments on appropriate prioritizations and how things ought to be costed and funded, we of course need to know what the figures are that we're dealing with.
Okay, Matthias Cormann, thanks very much for sharing that with us. We do all await, though. You are right, of course, all the estimates and forecasts have been changing, but I think people are waiting to hear directly from the opposition exactly where you would cut. Thanks very much for joining us, Senator Matthias Cormann, who's the Shadow Assistant Treasurer. They're the two issues, really, that I think we're going to hear a lot about next year, apart from border protection. But in the election year we're going to hear a lot about that economic debate from both sides of politics, and also about the union movement and union corruption, I think, from the other side. Thanks for joining us tonight on Viewpoint. I'll be back next Wednesday night.